Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Tabletop Studio. I am your man out of Japan, Jay Contra, and here we have one fake item. At least, I hope there's only one fake item because there's only one that I was able to identify. But what if I told you that it took me 14 years to figure out that an item that I have in my collection is a fake, a fraud, a forgery? Well, I'm going to tell you the story about one of my first ever retro game collecting purchases and how it turned out to be a fraud. The year was 2006, at least it was circa 2006. And what a time to be alive. The 2008 crash hadn't completely obliterated the global economy. Movies like Casino Royale were coming out and were showing us, new things that could be done with old characters, much like Batman Begins. And I was in high school, and I still had, for some reason, my Super Nintendo console, but I did not have a controller. Now, I was also into collecting retro video games because I'd been playing emulators back in my freshman and sophomore year of high school, and I decided that I wanted the real games that I not only had when I was a kid and had sold off, but also the games that I had played but I'd never been fortunate enough to own. So I went out and I bought Super Mario RPG, which at the time was a kingly $20, a lot of money back when I was in high school. And I also went and I had to buy a controller. And this indeed was the controller that I picked up from the internet. Internet shopping was still very new back in the year 2006. And this, I thought, was an amazing deal. I have no idea how much I paid for it. It was probably like, $15 or $20 at the time. But even back in the year 2006, I would say even up until the year 2010, you were still able to find complete in-box, even sometimes allegedly new controllers for the Super Nintendo. There's only one problem. This controller is fake. So what I want to do is I'm going to take it out of the box and I'm going to switch around the camera and I'm going to show you how I have been living with this lie for the last 14 or 15 years. I'm going to break this down and show you how to identify a fake Super Nintendo controller that is almost old enough to drive.
We begin with the box, which I actually don't think looks too terrible. I mean, I think you can see probably some, printing quality issues. Look at all of the printing lines all over this box. I don't think that this would be present on what is an official Super Nintendo controller box, but I think otherwise there's not really a ton that you can identify as fake. Because the controller itself is actually, upon first glance, the controller is actually not apparently fake. And I'm gonna show you why. So over here I have a real Super Nintendo controller, or at least it's as real. I have actually opened this up and I was able to identify it as a real Super Nintendo controller that I picked up off of eBay about a month ago. Now you'd say, oh, well, obviously they're different because the colors on this are different and you've got the printing here of Super Nintendo and then you've got the embossed, or I don't know, whatever you'd call it, the in-cut Nintendo symbol here. This is actually based off of the Super Nintendo controller that came with the Super Nintendo Mini, the smaller Nintendo that was produced later on in the Super Nintendo's life cycle. They actually came out with a new controller to match that console. But there are some easy ways you can identify the differences between these controllers, fake or not. The most obvious one, and I can't believe it took me about 15 years to realize this, is that it does not have the Nintendo branding on the plug. Now, I don't know why that is, because you can see very clearly they have reprinted Nintendo here. So I don't think it's to avoid like copyright or trademark or patent, because if you look at here on the official Super Nintendo controller, it has the Nintendo printed there. And even here on this old Super Famicom controller, it also has Nintendo printed very similarly there. Now, why it doesn't have it here, I don't know. Maybe that was a cost-cutting measure. Your guess is as good as mine. Now, looking at the controller as well, you can see here that it's like whatever you would call this, the surface here, is very clearly like a sticker that they just tape there. Now you can see here the surface here is a very nice plastic with a very good texture that matches the rest of the controller. So there's that key difference. You can see the buttons. I don't know if it's the decay of the plastic over time, but you can see the light purple here. The difference in the color there is very distinct. The rubber on the start and select buttons is actually very good. And what I have heard in my research, in my attempt to figure out whether or not this was a real controller or not, says that controllers of this model and design that are fakes tend to have very bad plastic for the start and the select buttons. That is not the case. It is almost identical to the nice rubbery plastic on these buttons here. So I couldn't really tell the difference there. You might be able to tell some difference with you can see the mold lines. I don't know what to call those, but the surface here around the D-pad is very evidently not the same. It's not that nice sort of like slightly rough texture that's present on the original Super Nintendo controller. Now, the clear and obvious difference, what you will be able to tell is that, for one, this is a little bit lighter in terms of weight, but look at the back. The backs are roughly the same. They're slightly different. You can kind of see the glare there is different from the glare here, but they have tried to definitely copy the back of the original Super Nintendo controller, and this back is different from the Super Nintendo Junior controller that was released. I think it has a completely different back. You can see here, they are very, very similar. Now you can also tell with the controller cord length. Now this knockoff, this reproduction, is about the same length as the Super Famicom controller. And actually what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change the camera right now. You can see from the controller cord lengths that the knockoff controller is about the same length as the Super Famicom official controller, and the official Super Nintendo controller that was produced in North America, it goes on forever. It goes on for days. It was meant for those big American television, those big American family rooms, those living rooms where you'd sit like, half a mile away from the television. Not so in Japan, where you'd be sitting in a very small living room and almost right in front of the television. But so that is another key difference between these two controllers. I'm not gonna beat myself up too much over buying a fake controller back when I was 15 or 16 years old. That's not really that big of a deal. What I think is really more interesting to me is that I couldn't recognize a fake Super Nintendo controller for like 15 years. I always thought that I had a genuine one. What I have read is that the company that produced these in the late 2000s was doing so with an official Nintendo license. Now, whether or not that was true, I kind of doubt it, but it's also very possible. What is, I think, very illuminating to me after this experience of discovering that I have a fake in my collection is, for one, it's not that big of a deal, it's not the end of the world. And for two, it's something where they've been making fakes of these things for, ever really since video gaming has been a thing. There have been fake Famicom consoles that have been produced in China and Russia since the 1980s. Fakes have always been a part of retro video game collecting for good and bad. Although in this case, hey, some company back in the late 2000s made 20 bucks off of me, where I would much rather have paid probably actually less at the time. That is the thing. You have to remember, is back in the late 2000s, retro video game collecting was really like in its very nascent stage. Things were just getting off the ground. I remember even when I paid $20 for this copy of Super Mario RPG, that was a lot at the time. If you had gone to a garage sale, you could have probably picked up this game for like, people would have been giving this away for $2 or $3. But back in the late 2000s, this was before YouTube, well, before I was going on YouTube at least. This is before video game collecting was a thing, but there was a retro video game shop in the town that I used to live in. And they had games. They were expensive games, and especially when I was in high school, I didn't have a lot of money. So buying this cartridge, this game that I have, that I borrowed when I was a kid, that's the thing, is I never actually owned Super Mario RPG when I was a kid. I actually borrowed it from some friends, and this game got me back really into console video game collecting. And so, of course, I had to buy the controller to match. Only it turns out the controller does not match in reality.
So I have been your man out of Japan, Jay Contra, telling you to be very wary. If I could go back and tell my past self to be wary about buying fakes and forgeries, I would also tell him to buy as many Super Nintendo games as possible because, oh boy, are those things going to get really expensive. But I can't go back in time. I can't go fix those past mistakes. However, what I can do is warn people, and I can send a message to the future to be very careful when you are purchasing controllers on the internet, regardless of the source. I stream regularly on Twitch on Saturdays and Sundays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I hope to see you there. Thanks for watching. See you next time, and mahalo.